Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sunday, the 29th of March, 2015. Just preparing for the Outsiders. First Dog on the Moon will be a separate broadcast to follow.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not.
Yes, indeed. And today we're joined by Tim Colbatch, former economics editor of The Age, now author and man about town. Sarah Lamarquand, columnist, contributing opinion editor to the Daily Telegraph, and exciting week for Sarah. The News Corp news site this week, Rendezvous. I'll spell that for you because it's tricky. RENDEZVIEW, so rendezvous.com.au. Anita Heiss, Dr. Anita Heiss is with us as well, adjunct professor at Jumbunna Indigenous House of Learning at the University of Technology, Sydney. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, what are you all wearing? Because that, I think, has been a question from what I've seen on Twitter that's exercising Anita's mind this morning. We're all in snuggies here in the RN studios because that's compulsory wear for Radio National.
Oh no, Anita and I are very glamorous in the Sydney studio this morning. Hair, makeup, nails, everything's done.
Well, this is what we expect on national radio. Tim, I hope you're keeping that standard high.
Jonathan, I'm glad this is on radio.
Now, an election, of course, held yesterday in New South Wales, a victory to Mike Baird.
The reason I love this state is because of its people. And friends, tonight they have chosen hope over fear.
Sarah, not an unexpected result, but an interesting one on a lot of fronts. A popular leader who went out there with potentially unpopular policy and sold it well.
That's right. It was, of course, an unexpected result. All the polls were showing that Mike Baird was well ahead, and I don't think anyone, including Luke Foley and his immediate supporters, really thought he was in with the shot. But it certainly, in both of the speeches last night, which I thought were very gracious, and I think Luke Foley, of course, spoke first in his concession speech and reached out to John Robertson, but also to Mike Baird in very generous terms, and then that was reciprocated by Mike Baird, and a lot of people in the state of New South Wales probably welcome that, because in 2011 we did not see that graciousness from either Christina Keneally, who was the outgoing Premier, or the then incoming Premier Barry O'Farrell. So I think that was a welcome moment where there was a little bit of bipartisanship and just a little bit of humility and graciousness on the part of both men.
But it had been played pretty hard in the closing days, that said.
Absolutely. And I think Mike Baird alluded to this very strongly in his victory speech, where he said there'd been a scare campaign and that it had cost them a few MPs. So, and he made a point of reaching out to those people and saying, which I don't think anyone really thinks will happen, that if anything in 4 years' time, I think it's obviously that will have been 2 terms of the Liberal government, and I think they'll probably be facing a fairly serious threat by Labor in 4 years' time, and probably those people would have a battle to get their seats. But as the leader, he is obviously obliged to reach out to them, and I think he was trying to make the point that he had been on the receiving end of a scare campaign, and we all know that scare campaigns can be effective. And whatever your personal view on electricity privatisation, there's certainly evidence, and in some parts of New South Wales it was a vote changer. There is obviously a limit to a state and a country of how much we want scare campaigns to be played. I think they've run effectively on everything from the Republic through to electricity privatisation, through to GST, and they are certainly the enemy of reform.
Tim Colbatch, there was a bit of talk leading up to this about the Abbott factor in this poll. An interesting comment on TV last night from the former New South Wales Treasurer Michael Egan, and his point was that Baird actually, yes, would have welcomed the contrast with Tony Abbott, that he showed New South Wales voters how positively he contrasted against some of the perceived negatives of the federal leader, unlike Queensland, where Abbott and Newman sort of look like 2 peas in a pod. Does that ring true for you?
Absolutely. Look, I think I was interested in something that Colin Friel said to you 10 minutes ago, that he said if one politician could just stick their head up in front of the camera and tell us what they actually believe, people would vote for them. I reckon yesterday's
that'd be Mike Baird, wouldn't it?
yesterday's result was a vindication of that, because he had, as Sarah said, he had an unpopular policy to sell, and that certainly didn't win him any votes. He had Tony Abbott on his back. That certainly didn't win him any votes, although I don't think it really was a factor, not a significant factor. And his personality overcame all that. I just want to make one point, Jonathan, about how unusual this result is. Before this, since that federal election in the middle of 2010, when Julia Gillard got back with the support of Windsor and Oakeshott, the independents, we'd had 11 federal, state and territory elections in Australia, and the governments had won just 3 of them. One of those was in South Australia, where Labor got back with 47% of the vote, because the Liberal vote is very concentrated in the country and in the posh suburbs of Adelaide. One was the ACT, which always votes Labor. And the other was Colin Barnett getting re-elected in WA at the peak of the mining boom. And this was the first, apart from that, the first sort of almost normal government facing re-election. And what a triumph. I mean, 55% of the two-party vote, that's in any normal circumstances, that would be a huge landslide win seen as a huge landslide win. Yet, in fact, we've got this strange thing where, as you said, alluded at the front, everyone's claiming victory. Sort of, Labor's happy because it got back, 9% swing, and the Greens are very happy because they got seats, and the Nationals are happy because they retained a couple.
And maybe that victory, Anita Heiss, is, as Tim suggests, sort of for, the capacity for a leader to go out there and tell it to us straight. Is this, Anita, sort of a win for that sensible centre we've been hearing about?
It's interesting because Sarah and I were talking about this prior to going to air, and in my world, almost every Labor voter that I know found Mike Baird personable. Most of the women and some of the men found him incredibly sexy. And even though the polls show that most people didn't want privatisation of electricity, the polls also showed that he was the most popular person. So I think he was on the front foot in many ways, because he is seen as a trustworthy, honest, kind, nice sort of fella. But also, Luke Foley was only in that position since January. So I have no doubt there were people who went to vote yesterday who still didn't know
There's a big who's that factor
who
with
the
Luke
leader of the
Foley,
opposition was. So I think, there are wins to be said to, for every party, because to go out and actually get some seats, Labor seats, with a leader that is still an unknown, is a measurable thing, I think.
It shows, doesn't it, Sarah, that, and this is perhaps the federal lesson here, if we want to take one from it, that tough policy is a possibility.
Absolutely. I think that's a great lesson, and I really hope that the federal politicians are taking note, because, as Tim said, it really does confirm this idea that's become increasingly unpopular, that you go out and you take the people into your confidence and you have frank conversations that aren't always easy to have. I would go back to 2000 and before that, the 1998 election. Now, I was personally passionately opposed to the GST. I objected to it at every level, but I did begrudgingly admire John Howard, the then Prime Minister, for the way he did take it to the people and prosecute it, and he did get it across the line. And really, since then, we haven't seen too much reform like that. We saw the carbon tax under Julia Gillard. That was only done as a condition to forming minority government when she was a condition of Bob Brown. Wasn't anything that was taken to the people. In fact, I mean, without going back through ancient history, famously, of course, she said that it wouldn't be taken to the people, and that there wouldn't be anything that electorally unpalatable up for grabs. So I think this is great, and I would like to see it broaden out to a whole range of issues, and particularly social issues, like going back to things like the Republic or same-sex marriage, that we have lacked that courage from our politicians.
Or even more narrowly, Tim Colbatch, and immediately the thinking around the next federal budget, which could benefit from the sort of the determination that Baird's shown here, and yet we don't sort of have that sense from the feds as they start to frame it.
No, I think it's too late. I think you only get one chance. The government only really gets one chance to rewrite the fiscal narrative, and they've blown it. Basically, they did a very poor job of making their choices in the last budget. Last budget didn't actually reduce the deficit. and that's one of the things
Oh,
few
look at
people
Grows and
realise, that
Bros. Yes.
it actually, the tax cuts they gave and the not going to say the last budget, I mean the fiscal goes that they've had, the MyEFO in December 2013, the budget, and then the MyEFO in December 2014. That's the mid-year, MyEFO's mid-year outlook. Between them, they've actually added more spending or tax cuts than they've taken away. So they've actually added to the budget deficit in the 4 years of their first term. In the long term, they'd save money because of the cuts to foreign aid and because they're shifting costs to the states on public hospitals.
Tim Colbatch, Sarah Marquand and Anita Heiss are our outsiders this morning. And I wanted to stop talking about politics for a moment to talk about angry, middle-aged white men.
Outspoken, outlandish and brash, Jeremy Clarkson has long courted controversy through a series of very unpolitically correct remarks. His fans have long lauded him for his style. His critics say he goes too far.
Anita Heiss, Jeremy Clarkson. As much as Top Gear is not really a program about cars, I didn't want this to be a conversation about Jeremy Clarkson as such, but he sort of represents this body of people who feel so set upon. And I wonder what his dismissal says to that group of angry chaps.
Do you mean the body of people as in the overindulged superstar, that the untouchable under the law, like them. NRL players? I mean, it's a no-brainer in terms of his dismissal. I thought about this when it happened, and I have found 3 criteria in terms of whether or not something is fair. And one is, did someone break the law? Well, he assaulted someone, so yes. Was he in breach of company code of conduct? And the BBC does have a charter, and I understand he was in breach of that. So tick. And generally, I mean, we need to be thinking about what sort of behaviour is considered socially and morally acceptable in a mature contemporary society. And one would think that punching someone over a plate of cheese is not acceptable, nor using the N-word or suggesting that truck drivers kill prostitutes and so forth. And it's interesting because there was a suggestion that his demographic for that program were these angry white men who feel disgruntled because diversity, they're left out of the whole diversity conversation. But in my own circle, a lot of children of my friends watch that show. So he is an impressionable figure on youth as well. And I think at some point, like our football players who get off quite easily with in Carmichael Hunt, for instance, with cocaine possession, I think at some point we need to say that why as a society and a legal system are we allowing such superstars to get away with the things that average people like you and I in our day jobs would never get away with.
And yet, Sarah, the angry white men are crying this week that this is being silenced. This is political correctness gone mad.
Oh, yeah, I'm just so worried about angry white men. I just don't think they've ever had a break. When are these poor angry white men going to... Yes. Mike Baird might write some social policy. Exactly. Look, I refuse to weep for Jeremy Clarkson, and I would really echo what Anita said. To me, that has been at the core of this discussion, and all these millions of people rushing off to sign petitions and openly lamenting the fact that this poor man might lose his job. I think the BBC not only made the right decision, they made the only decision that they could. But I think, Jonathan, to go to your broader point, that's what I find fascinating, is this glamorization of thuggery and what we're telling men, be it young men, be it teenage boys, be it older men that are finding themselves in a changing world and perhaps struggling for relevancy, which I actually think is fairly gender neutral. I think everyone faces that. But also, as the mother of 2 young boys, 5 and under, I'm also concerned about what the glamorization of that behaviour, and I'm talking about beyond Jeremy Clarkson. I think it's something that we see, Anita alluded to, in the football codes, for example, but also within the entertainment industry. Australia particularly is quite susceptible to this turning a blind eye, particularly when it comes to men. I'm going to reference Russell Crowe here.
Well, I want to bring a man in here. Tim, you're white and male. You feeling angry?
You're suggesting I'm an angry old man.
Well, I don't know.
Angry old white man.
Okay, well, Got to stop that. Start a new movie. Ciao.